Alrighty. Um, Take your Bible and turn, if you can, and some may not have the Bible, but not only to Revelation chapter 20, but then later on we're going to be going to the book of Ezekiel, chapter 38 and 39. And just be ready. That way we can go quickly from one to the other. Last week we started Revelation chapter 20 and talking about the millennium, and that this is Christ's temporary reign on earth. Temporary because it's only going to be a mere 1,000 years as opposed to eternity. And so this is what it's going to look like as a promise to Israel, and this reign on earth, Jerusalem being the capital, him on his throne, perfect reign. We who are believers in him will have various responsibilities with him in leadership and judging and things like that. It'll be a time where Satan's influence is not, if you look at the first part of Revelation 20, verse 1, I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the abyss, and holding in his hands a great chain. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And so, that's another reason why this is almost heaven on earth, where it's a time of peace. It's a time of long life, of plenty. Survivors of the tribulation are around, and they see what the perfect reign of Christ is like on earth, and everything's going great. But what happens after the millennium? 1,000 years of Jesus reigning on earth. 1,000 years of plenty and wonderful things and all this. And then it says in verse 7, when the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison. Why? Again, God's sovereignty is completely over it. There is a reason. And then, the ultimate, we're finding out in the after the millennium, after the 1,000 years, we're going to have the ultimate fate of Satan. And it's almost, I don't know if it's like, all right, after 1,000 years, are you gonna obey? Are you gonna be? I don't fully understand. But first thing he does is he deceives. He's released from his prison and will go out to deceive, and he deceives the nations. You just can't teach an old dog new tricks. He is twisted. He's known all along his demise, but yet he kept on. And so what does he do? What damage does he do? He goes to deceive the nations. Let me read all this. In the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, we'll get back to that later, to gather them for battle. In number, they are like the sand on the seashore. So there's a couple blanks here. Okay, he's deceiving the nations. First of all, it's worldwide. He goes worldwide. People who are all over the world, he deceives. And this army that is international from the four corners of the earth, who are also, it is an innumerable army. Listen, I dare you to take a tablespoon of sand at the beach and try to count it. Let alone. And it was a phrase. It was a phrase of, you can't count. You know, it was stated in a very positive way in the Psalms that if I were to count how many times you think of me, it would outnumber the sand of the sea as well. So it just means you can't count it. Verse 9, they marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people. And then it explains what that is, the city he loves. We'll stop right there halfway through that verse. He surrounds the capital city of Jerusalem. This is where Jesus has been reigning. And you're going, oh no. I mean, think about an army that you can't even count the numbers, totally surrounding this city, an army that this city has never seen before. But fire came down from heaven and devoured them. It's just like a little hiccup. This big army, they come with all whatever they want to come with, and they surround the city, and it's over. It's over quickly. It doesn't go into the details or anything about it. It just says fire came down and consumed them and devoured them. Obviously, there's going to be, some other things left. And so earlier in this passage, it mentions in there, going back to verse 8, he will go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth. And then it has Gog and Magog to gather them for battle. And you're going, what's this Gog? What's this Magog? I'm glad you asked. Here's where I want you to hold your place in the book of Revelation and go to Ezekiel chapter 38. This is where it is mentioned. And I'll just let you know, I will state some things and say, yes, it looks like this. And then I'll say, yeah, but. And I'm not going to have a definitive answer on this. And I think when it happens, we'll realize it. Okay? Who or what is Gog and Magog? Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 1. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Prophesy against him. So, this passage of scripture, there's a guy named Gog. And Magog is probably the land, the name of the kingdom that he is ruling. It defines a little bit more. The chief prince, in some translations, have Rosh in there, but that means chief. And so the NIV just translated that. The chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Now some people, I'll let you know where some people have taken this. Because Meshech starts with an M, they think they're talking about Moscow. No, there was a city, an area called Meshech, and it was in Asia Minor, Turkey. And Tubal, which also was in Asia Minor, or what we know as Turkey. So there's a specific region that Ezekiel knew and his readers knew. And then it talks later on, skipping down, it talks about other nations are going to join them. And verse 5 goes through this list. Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them. And all of us know where all those places are, right? I know Mike does because I know he studied this. Persia is present-day Iran.
You left out Rosh.
No, remember what I said, Rosh up ahead? The translation of Rosh is chief. And so the translation I
have the correct...
I'm just letting you know, and I mentioned that. So that's why I say some translations say the prince, Rosh, or whatever, but it just means the chief prince. It's an adjective.
Mine says Prince of Rosh.
Right. And
Of-
and I will show you stuff
of-
later on.
okay.
I'll show you the original Hebrew.
I'm here to argue with you,
Okay.
buddy.
All righty. All righty. So Persia is Iran. Cush is what we know as the Sudan and northern Ethiopia. And Put is Libya. And so Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them, all with their shields and helmets. Also Gomer, another area that was in Turkey, with all its troops, and Beth Togarmah, which is also the Turkey area. A lot of things from Asia Minor. From the far north, with all its troops, the many nations with you. So, and then there's this other group that's coming from the far north. So it's just saying, so here's all these areas, primarily in that area from Africa, from Asia Minor, and then this from the north group coming. Skip down to verse 8. After many days you will be called to arms. In future years you will invade a land that has recovered from war, whose people were gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel, which had been desolate. So they're saying the Israelites who were spread across the world have now come back to their land. Okay, and you can say to a degree that has happened to a degree. They've been brought out from the nations, and now all of them live in safety. Remember, Ezekiel was written during the time of the Babylonian exile. Now there was some coming back after that. Verse 9, you and all your troops and the many nations will go with you will go up, advancing like a storm. You will be like a cloud covering the land. Sounds like an innumerable army. Verse 10. This is what the sovereign Lord says, on that day, thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil scheme. Now again, if this is talking about what we just read, where did the evil scheme come from? Satan, who came to deceive the nations. So, I can see some parallels. You will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. I will attack a peaceful and unsuspecting people, all of them living without walls and without gates and bars. I will plunder and loot and turn my hand against the resettled ruins and the people gathered from the nations, rich in livestock and goods, living at the center of the land. So the deception is they're all peaceful, and they've been in peace for so long, they don't even have walls up. We could go in without any hindrance whatsoever. Has there been a time in the Israel's history that they haven't had walls, other than the time where Nehemiah had to rebuild it? It was like, oh no, there's not walls, let's build them. There's always been walls. So we're still talking about something in the future. And I could see that after 1,000 years reign of Christ, you don't need walls. He's your king. You've been at peace. You forgot what war was. In fact, you took all your war implements and made them into pruning hooks and other instruments. Verse 16. Again, I'm skipping that because there's tons right here. You will advance against my people Israel like a cloud that covers the land. In days to come, O Gog, I will bring you against. Now, who's bringing him against my land? God. God is sovereign. Even though, oh no, the enemy's coming, God is still sovereign. He's setting them up. I will bring you against my land so that the nations may know me when I show myself holy through you before their eyes. Skip down to 22. I will execute judgment upon him with plague and bloodshed. I will pour down torrents of rain, hailstone, and burning sulfur on him and on his troops. on the many nations with him. And so I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the sight of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord. Now, does that sound like what we just read in Revelation?
Just to me.
And it would to me, except for chapter 39. It messes it all up. And so, anyway. Chapter 39, go to verse 9. So they're already wiped out, and God talks to the birds and says, have your fill, that's your sacrifice, Verse 9, then those who live in the towns of Israel will go out and use the weapons for fuel and burn them up. The weapons of the enemy, okay? The small and the large shields, the bows and the arrows, the war clubs and spears. For 7 years, they will use them for fuel. They will not need to gather wood from the fields or cut it from the forest, because they will use the weapons for fuel, and they will plunder those who plundered them and loot those who looted them, declares the sovereign Lord. And so, all right, there's so much wood from this group of people who are still fighting with sticks that they don't have to get firewood anymore for any of the fuel, any of the warmth they need, anything. 7 years worth of firewood. Okay, that's wonderful. Verse 11. On that day I will give Gog a burial place in Israel, in the valley of those who travel east toward the sea. I will block the way of the travelers, because Gog and his hordes will be buried there. So it will be called the valley of Hamon Gog. For 7 months the house of Israel will be burying them in order to cleanse the land. The people of the land will bury them, and the day I am glorified will be a memorial day for them, declares the sovereign Lord. And it goes on and on. But here's an issue I have. I know what's next in Revelation. What's next in Revelation is Satan is, when these armies fall, God says, fire, boom, down, gone. He takes Satan and he throws him into the lake of fire. Then he gathers all the dead. Those who are, because there's already been a resurrection, except for those who did not know the Lord. And he raises the dead, and they face the white throne judgment. We're going to be covering this in just a little bit. And at the point of him bringing them before the white throne, all of earth and the heavens cannot be in the face of God, in the presence of God, and it flees away. So it's just God and these people. So my only question, I'm just saying, when I read chapter 38, I go, yeah, I can see some parallels. But then when I read chapter 39, if right after Satan is then put into the lake of fire, and heaven and earth are what we know physically is heaven and earth now, they'll be remade later, but is gone. Why are they burying people for 7 years?
Months.
7 months. Why are they collecting firewood to last them for 7 years? I don't know. And this is why when I read different scholars on this and I look at it and all that, some go, well, we think this is what Revelation is talking about. And then some say, yeah, but. And so I just leave you with that, going, okay, I don't know.
There are people like you have read different versions.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people think that the Gog-Magog war is going to happen before the tribulation. And anyway, I held to that belief for a long time. And I just find it hard of late when I read what we're talking about now in Revelation now, I don't claim to be right, this is just where I stand on it now.
Yeah.
It's just odd to me that he would use the same terminology that was spoken about as, remember now, he's talking about in the latter days. Well, the
Yeah.
latter days includes the millennium.
Yeah.
The millennium is not excluded
Yeah.
from the latter days.
So, I'm just saying that there's a couple things I cannot reconcile, and I'm okay with that. You know, it's one of those things going, that's what it is. I think, and that's why there's people who are a lot smarter than me, and even you, that disagree, and I'm like, I'm okay.
I get that, but at the same time, I want to know.
I know,
As
but
best
just
I can.
realize in humility that we aren't going to get to know everything.
Right, I realize
Yeah,
that.
and that's why I stated out there.
But
Yeah,
I just find it's odd that he would use the term Gog and Magog again at the end of the millennium, and not only that, but destroy them in the same exact fashion that Ezekiel talks about, and yet you got all these experts, if you will. And listen, I'm not. They are much smarter than I am about all those things, but I just find it odd to think that God would use the same, have two of the same war at thousands of years apart, and everything goes down the same way.
Yeah.
The only difference is Ezekiel gives tremendous detail, whereas
Well,
John just
this
says,
is why we
this
went
is what's
back
gonna
there.
happen, It's gonna come down with fire, and that'll be the end of
Yeah.
it, and bingo, bang.
yeah. My reconciliation of it, as much as my mind can do it, because there's still a lot of loose threads on it, and that is, it is the only place that Gog and Magog are mentioned.
And
Ezekiel and Revelation.
And-
And so there is a connection to what's said in Ezekiel. It's just I haven't been able to connect it fully.
See, and another clue for me is why I believe he's referring to the end as opposed to before, is the fact that in Ezekiel, he says it right there, right after verse 8 in 38, he says they will come out of war. And they're going to be living in peace without bars and walls, like you said.
Yeah, yeah.
There's never been time, and I guarantee you, with the walls that have been built all the way around Israel in modern times, they're not just, with the money and everything else spent on putting those up, they're not just going to knock them down.
Yeah, no, I think there is
And the
something
thing, and also
here.
Daniel talks about the fact that they're going to suffer tribulation right on through to the end of the 70th week of that prophecy, which is the 7-year tribulation.
Yeah.
So they're going to be coming. That to me is where they come out of war and tribulation, and then they live in a land, the Millennium Kingdom.
Right, right.
So that's how I come to my current stance. Now,
Right.
that can change with if somebody can come up with.
Well, I did not mean for us to get too much into this.
Yeah, well, that's all right.
Because
We're here to talk about it.
I did want to bring it up because Revelation brings it up. And when you see something, you go back. But then I also say you read it all, and then there's some things like I said, I can't reconcile them getting all that wood to use for 7 years when there's no longer going to be earth or heaven anymore. Or, because that's what's next. And we're going to look at that right now. And that's where I'm like, is it going to, after Satan is thrown into the lake of fire, it's going to take 7 years before the white throne judgment? I don't see that in there. And that's where I'm like, I can't fully say this is it. And that's why there's a lot of differing opinions. So let's continue back with Revelation. I did want you to look back there and see. And I wanted to share with you that, and please, I appreciate discussion. Okay? And so that's, it's healthy. This is not thus saith Randy. And so, all righty. Let's go back to verse 10. Okay? Where we left off in Revelation 20. But fire came down and devoured them. So the armies devoured. Verse 10. And the devil, who deceived them, was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. How long ago? 1,000 years. In torment. They, now we're talking the beast, false prophet, who've already been there for 1,000 years, will be tormented day and night forever and ever. A non-ending torment. Satan is punished forever. Then we go to the ultimate fate, and for the blank I have sinners. We're all sinners. But in God's eyes, I'm not a sinner anymore because he took my sin away. He sees me as the righteousness of Christ. So I take it in that way, that term, the ultimate fate of sinners, those who did not come to Christ in faith. Verse 11. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. Earth and sky fled from his presence, literally his face, and there was no place for them. Now you're going, what does it mean that the earth's the sky? What's going on? I put in your half sheet 1 Peter 3, verses 10 through 13. It says, but the day of the Lord will come like a thief. The heavens will disappear. Okay, and we're seeing it with a roar. The elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything in it will be laid bare. Since everything will be destroyed in this way, what kind of people ought you to be? You ought to live holy and godly lives as you look forward to the day of God and speed its coming. That day will bring about the destruction of the heavens by fire, and the elements will melt in the heat. But in keeping with his promise, we are looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth, the home of righteousness. And so chapter 20 is going, all right, this is what 2 Peter is talking about. The old earth and the old heavens, we're having a redo. And this first is going away, and then we get to chapter 21 and we see the redo. And so after it says there's no place for them, so now there's no more earth, there's no law, and it says, I saw the dead, great and small, famous and not known, standing before the throne. And the books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to what they had done, as recorded in the books. The sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and Hades, the grave, gave up the dead that were in them, and each person was judged according to what he had done. Realize that. What are people judged on? What they've done. Okay? How they lived. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. The lake of fire is the second death. If anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. Let's break this down. Many books are mentioned. Literally scrolls. Books weren't made yet at the time of this writing. Maybe a scroll for each person. Maybe all the many books was, here's one with my name on it. You know, and you could look and see everything I've ever done. I don't know. It doesn't explain what the books are. But we're judged by what's written, or not we. They are judged by what's written in the books. Then it mentions, okay, there's many, many books, but then there's the book of life. Verse 15 again, if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. This brings a good question. How does my name get in the book of life? It says in Revelation 13:8, Put that on your sheet. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast. That's the context. All whose names have not been written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb that was slain from the creation of the world. Okay. How does my name get in the book of life? Look at it again. All those whose names have not been written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb. How does your name get in? You are belonging to the Lamb. How do you belong to the Lamb? By giving your life to Christ. Not a simple little prayer, but a surrender of your life to Him, trusting Him alone for salvation. Because when it comes to getting into heaven, the books don't matter. Each person was judged according to what he had done. And you know what? It doesn't state it here, but obviously it wasn't enough. I loved people. I loved my wife. Did you love perfectly? That's the standard. But I gave to all sorts of needs and causes and even to church. Did you give perfectly and sacrificially? But I was a member of whatever you think a good member of whatever is.
James Creek.
Yeah. Were you a perfect member?
I was.
Did you serve perfectly? Did you work perfectly? But I have titles. I was a pastor. Do I have the title forgiven? Did you parent perfectly? No matter if someone is judged by their life, no one other than Christ can measure up. There will be enough in every person's book to condemn every person. Because it's not, here's your blank, it's not what you do, but who you know. I put Matthew 7 here. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons and perform many miracles? Look at these words. Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. See, it's not what you do. Do you know him? Away from me, you evildoers. We could never do enough. That's why Jesus did it all. All these books, and they're read, and I believe because God's timing, can seem like minutes, whatever, but everybody probably gets to see their life or hear it read or whatever, and as it's read, they realize their guilt. They realize that what they're about to get is what they deserve. The only way is to have your name written in the Lamb's Book of Life. Because then the books don't matter. It doesn't matter what you've done. It matters what Jesus did. Because where you live forever is linked with what you did with Jesus. After, for God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. It continues. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Don't miss that verse. That verse is saying Jesus came so people didn't have to go to hell. Then it says, whoever believes in him is not condemned. But whoever does not believe stands condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. So after Satan is thrown into the lake of fire, then all those who died are resurrected to face the same. And then the rest of the book, it's the ultimate state of the saints. What's it going to be like for us, we who believed? Let's pray. And Jesus, seeing the end, seeing the judgment, and that, Holy Spirit, that is part of your job. You are the one who is the convictor of sin and of judgment. And so, anybody in this room, anybody who listens to this, instead of trusting what's in their life and what they've done and the good things they've done, to realize that we stand condemned without you. That we would not trust in our own goodness or righteousness or anything. That we solely and only trust in you, Jesus. And we see the end. We see that one day everything that we know of this world is going to go. What kind of life should we live today? I pray in your name. Amen.